right, welcome to Remnant. My name's Frank. I'm one of the pastors. Who knew that preaching was a high-impact sport? I didn't know. So I told Tammy I'd be more careful today, but I'm going to 86 the helmet. If you don't know, last week I was told I did one of the greatest sermon illustrations ever. I didn't realize it, but right before I got vertigo and hit the deck, I had said, if you do this, your life will be imbalanced. And then I did that. I heard all the jokes. Your sermon fell flat. You finally fell asleep during your own sermon. All those kind of things. So, I don't like to talk about it up here much, but I have Meniere's. Periodically I get vertigo, and now it's captured live feed for the world to see. So it can be pretty intense. I don't get any warning, and it's really sort of like, it's just really intense. So if I hold on, I'm told this is more sturdy than last week's, but I'm not buying it. So if I say vertigo, I think I have a whole group of people ready to run up here and hold me up. So I'm glad you joined us. My name's Frank. I'm one of the pastors. We're in a series about changing our hearts, and it really is one of the hardest things that God asks us to allow Him to do. You see, we think we change our hearts. We don't. We surrender, and He changes our hearts. And so I'm glad you've joined us. It's been challenging so far. Last week we dealt with guilt. And I'm proud of our church because this is not an easy journey. These are topics that people don't like to preach on. Today's topic, I'm probably going to need that helmet later because you may want to throw things at me before we're done. But Jesus has something He wants us to clean out of our hearts today. And the topic we're going to talk about is greed. Now, most of us, when we think of greed, we think of Scrooge. Mean, guarded, holding on to his gold, living in poverty because he doesn't want to spend his money. And he doesn't have a compassionate bone in his body. We look at that picture and we think, well, I'm definitely not that person, so I'm not greedy. I got this covered. I've got the week off. This is so cool. I'll just sit back and I'll watch, and everybody else, all those greedy people, they can figure out what to do. But you see, greed is difficult because at times we can camouflage it as a virtue. People who struggle with greed often say, well, I'm just careful. I'm a saver. I'm a good steward. They don't want to have to one day depend on somebody else, and they're just being protective over their stuff. I watch my stuff. I'm guarding my stuff. It's very easy for greed to be camouflaged as something that's a positive thing. And almost no one, when looking over their life, thinks, you know what, my problem is, at the very core of my being, I'm just a greedy person. We don't see it. It's difficult to see in the mirror, and it's not always obvious. Guilt, we talked about last week, that's obvious. But greed is one of those things where we just go, yeah. But Jesus is going to teach us today that there's different kinds of greed. I want to reassure you that today's topic of greed really has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with the church wanting your money. I'm going to warn you in advance that I'm going to ruffle some feathers today. I'm going to challenge you, probably offend some of you. But the mission of God to clean out our hearts is more important than your feelings. Sorry. God calls us to a higher standard. He calls us to preach truth. He asks us to preach truth and let you sort of work with Him on what you need to do in light of the truth that's revealed. When you start to get upset with me later, please remember my motive in these sermons is to do the hard work of revealing what's in our hearts so that we can clean them out, so that we can be more like Christ. One thing I know for sure, without a doubt, I am a very greedy person. I told you when we started this series, I got every one of these. Greed is a big issue for me. I've struggled with this for years. It's an area of my life where I've made one step forward, two steps back. I always think I'm doing better, then I find out I'm not. I'm teaching this heart condition today from the perspective of someone who has learned some life lessons in this area, and I hope to share some of those with you. I'm still learning. I'm a recovering materialist. I know how hard this is because at one point in my life, everything about me was linked to my possessions. I trusted my possessions. I loved my possessions. I guarded my possessions. I placed my security in my possessions. I took a lot of pride in my possessions. I allowed what I owned to define me. I put what I had and what I owned ahead of every relationship in my life, and my entire life centered around the worship of my possessions and me. I used every relationship in my life to further secure more possessions. I thought if I just kept owning stuff and making more money and doing more, that I would find peace and security and that I would finally be able to control what's happening in my life. And so I looked for things to buy all the time. I had a heart full of greed and insatiable appetite to spend my money on me and bring all my possessions into my storehouse to honor and glorify and worship me. I was the first one to buy the latest technology, the newest electronics, the best golf equipment, the best boat, you name it, I had to have it. Now here's the interesting thing. A lot of the things I bought for me, I didn't even really want. But deep down in my heart, I thought I deserved the best. And since I deserve the best, I'll buy it. I can buy security. I thought I could buy peace. I thought I could spend my way into protecting my family. My greed was all about worshiping me. Painfully, I discovered that I'm really not worthy of my own worship. That my money doesn't bring security, only God does. I learned that I don't provide the money I have, only God does. Whatever I have is His, not mine. I learned that I don't have the answers to my greed, only God does. So I had to learn to give God control of my finances in order to turn my life around. What I learned through the process is that how I handle money is a vital sign in my relationship with God. Now you may be thinking, well, you're a doctor, and doctors, they make money, and so greed's not a problem. Yeah, you're rich. Not true. Greed has nothing to do with your income. It has nothing to do with how much you have. It has to do with your heart towards what you have. Some of the greediest people I know can barely rub two nickels together. You see, greed's not a financial issue. It's a heart issue. Greed is one of Satan's best weapons against the mission of God. Jesus saw greed as an attack, something we have to guard against. He tells people, look, you're going to go out in the world. You need to be on guard. One day, Jesus was teaching a large crowd, and the topic was on the value of following God. He told them of this great value of placing your life first. He's telling the audience, thousands of people, Luke says, wanted to get close to Jesus. They wanted to get so close to Him, they were trampling to get there. And Jesus is teaching them. And He's telling them, look, He says, look, it's cost you something to follow me. The sacrifices that are necessary. How important the things of God are, how unimportant the things of the world are. He told them, you're going to be persecuted. But don't fear those who can only kill the body. Worry about those who can take care of your soul. God knows every hair on your head. He's teaching a very intense sermon to a lot of people. He's graphically describing the cost of what it takes to follow Him. And in the middle of that kind of conversation, a man interrupts him and cries out from the crowd, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide his inheritance with me." Do you hear how selfish and inappropriate that question is? Jesus is talking about giving up your life, and He just wants to make sure he gets his money. Often rabbis served as mediators in these kind of disputes, so this man approaches Jesus as if Jesus is his mediator. He doesn't want somebody to decide what to do. He wants to tell Jesus what to do, and he wants Jesus to tell his brother what to do. And as always, Jesus is watching the heart. And what he sees is ugly. He sees something that's being hoarded. He sees greed. But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against." He turns to this man, he said, who made me an arbitrator of you? He didn't feel it was his responsibility in this matter. And the truth is, Jesus doesn't take up every dispute that's brought to him. He's not concerned, this man is not concerned at all about justice. He wants to get what he wants. And Jesus says, look, what's going on here has nothing to do with your inheritance, nothing to do with your money. It has to do with how ugly your heart is. So let me teach you something about your heart that you can't see yourself. Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Jesus warns us to watch out. He teaches us. He says, look, be on guard. When Jesus tells you to be on guard about something, you better get ready. He's warning you. Satan is coming at you. You need to be on guard. And Jesus is beginning to teach us there's all kinds of greed. Many people would say, well, I'm not like Scrooge, so I don't really have greed. My heart goes out to people in need. My heart goes out to those that are starving. My heart goes out to those that are homeless. My heart goes out to those that are victims of crimes or natural disaster. It breaks my heart. My heart goes out. I have a compassionate heart, so I don't really have a greed issue. And Jesus says, man, watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. The kind where your heart moves, but your wallet doesn't. Jesus is saying, hey, for those of you who don't think greed is an issue, your life is not defined or found in the abundance of your possessions. What Jesus is saying here is so powerful. It's life transforming if you can embrace it. He teaches that there's a kind of greed, probably the most common kind of greed that almost all of us have, where you live as if the acquisition, the hoarding, the constant upgrading, the constant storing up possessions defines your life. Jesus says, look, there's a kind of greed you may be totally unaware of in your own life because it's more subtle. It's a kind of greed where your possessions are placed at the altar of your God, and your God is you. There's a type of greed where you can be totally unaware that as you go around purchasing and upgrading and hoarding for the things you need, and then somebody comes and says, hey, we need some money to help out somebody, and you look at what's instantly available in your checking account and you go, I just can't give. We spend all kinds of energy, all kinds of time, all kinds of money to upgrade my lifestyle. But if you want a donation or a need, I looked in my checking account, I don't have the cash, so I better not. What's up with that? We will rearrange the world to buy stuff for ourselves. I'll figure out how to finance it. I'll figure out how to go on that shopping trip. But we have short arms when somebody else is in need. Do you know what Jesus calls that? Greed. Many of us live our lives as if it depends upon our last purchase, the latest upgrade, or whatever we want. We call it trendy. Jesus says, no, it's greed. You'll begin to see greed when you ask somebody to give to something, which, by the way, I'm going to ask you to do later in this sermon. Isn't it amazing how different our attitude is towards spending than towards giving? In other words, we'll spend money we don't have on things we don't need, but not give what we have to those who really need it. We can't give a $100 bill, but we can figure out how to finance $4,000 if it's for us. Here's the deception we all buy into. I feel compassionate. I feel sorry for others. I really want to give. I really love my church. I really want to help meet that need. I really want to help that cause. I really want to be generous. I have all these great heart feelings. I just can't write the check. You see, because I've already spent everything on me. I feel like my heart's good, though, because I have those feelings. I can't give you the dollars because they're not really accessible. You see, I've already spent them on me. Then we turn around, we leverage, we borrow, we run up our credit cards, we make poor financial decisions, because we want something. We want our lifestyle. We want something that we drive. What is that? Jesus says, well, I know what that is. That's the greed that's in your heart. That's you worshiping you. Last week we learned that guilt says, I owe you, and today we're going to understand what greed says. Greed says, I worship me. I worship me. Greed is using God's resources and treasure for the worship of a false god, which is ourselves. It's not a money issue, it's a heart issue. And Jesus, our cardiologist, wants to clean out our heart, because that's the filter you use when it comes to financial decisions and kingdom decisions. You see, you'll know you're conquering greed in your heart when you begin to reallocate your resources and you go to as much effort to help somebody else as you will to purchase something for yourself. Please join me in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. This passage is so powerful because Jesus gives us a very practical way to change our hearts. Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. It's a clear command. Don't do it. We'll see later that he's not talking about don't have a savings account. He's not telling you don't have a retirement account. Don't plan for your kids' college funds. This is not a verse against being responsible. In other verses of the Bible, we're told to be like the ant and store up for winter and life's eventualities. This is not liquidate everything and live on the street and God will bless you. Jesus is not arguing here for irresponsible living. I know many people are self-righteous, pious, and arrogant about their poverty. Jesus is not teaching us to adopt that sinful attitude. He's addressing those of us who keep swapping out the old for the new, and we're on this incessant hoarding mission, chasing our wants rather than his needs. And Jesus says, stop it. Stop it. Release your death grip on the stuff of this world. Stop hoarding things in your heart and in your life on earth. Let me ask you this question. When you think about all the things you have, where do you store them? We're great at filling up homes, closets, attics, storage sheds. You seen how many storage sheds there are now? We tend to store up our stuff in and around our home. Jesus says, look, that's great. That's exactly what I want you to do. I want you to store up a bunch of stuff at your home. But my Talmudim, my disciples, remember, this is not your home. Lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth or rust destroys and where thieves don't break in and steal. Jesus says, look, the only thing I want you to store is spiritual things in your heart and in your lives that belong at home, in heaven. Those are the only things worth keeping. They're the only things so valuable that I want you to store them in heaven where the Father is. What are these kind of treasures? Well, Jesus says when we commit our resources, our money, our time, our talents to his work in the world, we begin to store up treasures. Paul says it this way, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. When we serve sacrificially, when we begin to invest in the lives of other people, we store up treasures in heaven. Small act of services don't go unnoticed by God. If anyone gives even a cold cup of water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will not lose their reward. Jesus says, look, store up treasures in heaven. Invest in the lives of people around you. Move my kingdom forward. Serve other people. Use your resources for what I need you to use your resources for. And when it comes to things on earth, give that junk away. In case you don't believe me, let's go to Luke where he's teaching the same lesson. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches or moth destroys. Jesus says, look, I want you to liquidate some of your possessions. Not all of them. meet the needs of your family, reasonably plan for your future, but upgrade someone else's life out of the abundance I've given you. I want you to quit thinking about you're bigger and you're better and you're more, and I want you to get really creative and give some thought to how you can reallocate what I've given to you for my purposes and my kingdom. I want you to start thinking about somebody else's needs and not just your wants. So he teaches, don't be a hoarder of things, be a giver. Then he gives us the reason why. I love this about God. Every time God challenges us with something that's difficult, something he knows we don't want to do, he provides the encouragement that we can do it, and he gives us the blessing that will follow if we obey him. Now, both of our passages in Matthew and Luke end with this promise. What do you think the promise is going to be? You would think Jesus would say, look, don't store up your treasures in heaven because there's people here on earth who are hungry and need food. Or don't store up your treasures because people need clothes and you have 2 closets full. Or don't store up your treasures because you have 2 empty bedrooms and there are people begging for a tent. Or don't store up your treasures because young girls are sold into sex trade and we can purchase their security. Don't store up your treasures because a community without vibrant, well-funded churches isn't worth living in. He could say any of those things. And they're all good reasons for us not to store up stuff, right? But that's not where he goes here. Not that he disagrees, but he's here to teach a much bigger lesson. He's here to teach a lesson about the heart, about greed, about the core of what makes our decisions. He takes us to a powerful principle that if we can apply in our lives, it'll make our heart free and clear of greed, and it will provide for the needs of others and advance the gospel message. It'll get us in alignment with God's kingdom instead of our own. Here's what he says. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will go. Jesus says, look, I want you to get the greed out of your heart because there's a connection between where your treasure goes and where your heart's going to end up. If we can get our hearts in the right place, all those needs we've been mentioning will be well funded and cared for. Greed is not about your money. It's not about how much money you have. You may have tons of stuff or you may just have what's on your back. It doesn't matter. It's not about how much you have. It's the condition of your heart and the thoughts about what you do have. Or more specifically, what you think you deserve. You see, Jesus is constantly searching the heart and testing the mind. He looks at what he's given to you and he checks your heart to see what you think about it. And then he says, where your treasure is, that's where I'm going to find your heart. Said another way, if I watch how you manage the money and resources I've given to you, I'll know very quickly who you truly worship. Show me the investment of your money, and I'll show you the current condition of your heart. If you want to know where your heart is, just follow the money trail. Where your treasure goes, there your heart will go. Look at your checkbook. Look at your American Express bill. Look at your Visa register. Go online. Look at your bank account. Look at how you spend your disability check. Look at how you spend the money you come across. Look at how you spend the money you get in day labor. It doesn't matter where it comes from. God has provided it to you for a purpose. And let me just clue you in, the purpose is not you and your kingdom. But wait a minute. I know my money doesn't show it, but my heart goes out to people. My heart wants to help them. I feel for them. If you want to know where your heart is and not just what your heart feels, watch where your money's going. Your feelings come and go. But the condition of our hearts, the location of our money tells us the truth about the condition of your heart. Have you ever watched somebody make an investment in a new stock? All of a sudden, they're checking that stock price every day. They're checking it all the time. They never checked the price before. They may not even know what the company does. But now their money's there, so they're invested there. Their heart's going towards that stock because that's where they put their money. Now maybe you've checked out already because this is just another pastor giving a money talk. Check in for just 3 minutes. Because I want to tell you why we're going to talk about how we spend God's money. Before I do, I want you to know something. I'm a volunteer. This church could blow and go financially. It doesn't impact me, other than praising God and using the money in a good way. I have no dog in this fight except to see God's mission for our church come to fruition. So I'm not one of those pastors who's trying to get you to give to the church so I can go buy a big house on the water. I want to see God's mission accomplished through our church, and here's the deal. It reveals the heart of our church. This is so important. Because Jesus says, look, the reason I want you to realize where you're spending your money, the reason I want you to see that you're worshiping yourself is this. Where your money goes today shows where your heart is today. But if you make a decision to change where your money goes, your heart's going to change and go there too. Where you spend your money is an indication of the current condition of your heart, but it also can be used to change your heart. When you reallocate your resources from worshiping me to worshiping God, your heart moves from preserving me to, God, what do you need me to do? And Jesus is all about your heart. Where your money goes today shows where your heart is. And he says, look, I want you to move your heart towards the things of God. I want you to move your heart towards things that are stored in heaven. I need you to move your heart towards me, but in order to do that, you've got to move your resources towards me. If you spend your money somewhere else in a matter of time, that's where your heart's going to go. If you move your treasure from your kingdom to God's kingdom, your heart's going to take a huge step towards God. Jesus says, I don't want your stuff, I want your heart. I'm the one who gave you your stuff. I can take it away whenever I want. Jesus knows that when we make the hard and difficult decision to reallocate our wealth towards the things of God, that it'll move our heart to where he wants us to be. Jesus is teaching the antidote to greed. Greed says, I worship me. I invest in me. My treasure goes to me. My heart is all about me. The antidote, giving. Endless generosity. If you end the pursuit of endless acquisition and replace it with endless generosity, you're going to begin to strip your heart of greed. Jesus tells something to begin to send our message, our money, our resources towards the kingdom. Where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Notice that Jesus didn't say, where you serve, your heart will be. Where you attend, your heart will be. Where you wish your treasure would go, there your heart will be. He says, where your treasure actually is, that's where you'll find your heart. So when you make a financial investment in a community of believers, your investment is much deeper than a financial one. You take your heart there. That's why we require that the partners of Remnant are active tithers. Why? Because we want your heart. We want your heart on the mission of God and not on your own mission. Your money and your possessions have the ability to redirect your heart. God wants your heart connected to him, his church, and his things he does. When you take the resources God has given you and spend it on yourself, God says that's greed. And he has another word for it. He calls it robbery. Malachi 3:8, will man rob God? Yet you're robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and contributions. Notice those are two different things. You're cursed with a curse, for you're robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And put me to the test, the Lord says, if I will not open the windows of heaven on you and pour down for you a blessing until there's no more need. God says, look, test me. Bring your full tithe to my house. I'll promise you a blessing. It may not be financial. It may be in heaven. You may never see it here on earth. I don't know. He says, look, just do it. Trust me. I will bless you. If you have a hard time connecting your heart to a church or to a group of believers, I would ask you a question: are you invested? No, really, have you made a literal financial investment in what God is doing through those people in that church and in that place? Is your treasure invested in your church? Because God says where your money goes, your heart goes. So often people attend churches for years and they don't personally contribute, and then they wonder why they never feel part of what's going on there. It's because their heart's not there. Jesus says, look, there's a form of greed. It's not a financial issue, it's a heart issue. By not tithing, you're missing out on the blessings of being fully committed to what God's doing through a group of believers. More importantly, it separates you from the Father. Do you enjoy intimacy with people you're stealing from? God says you're robbing me. I've spoken to many people who've made the decision to begin tithing, and I've never yet had one person regret it. Stories that come back are not about the money they've lost, but the overwhelming change that occurred in their hearts. Figuring out how to rearrange our resources to free us up for giving opportunities changes our heart. I've never met anybody who regretted following God's advice in this area. When people tell me they don't feel connected to God, they're having a hard time connecting, my first question to them is, what are you doing with your body sexually? My second question is, how have you honored God with the money that He's entrusted to you? And then Jesus gives an illustration that just clears this whole thing up. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy or good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Really helpful, right? Thank you, Jesus. That makes sense. We're talking about giving and tithing in our heart, and you suddenly change to talk about eyes and lights and good and bad. What are you talking about? He's talking about everything Jesus does is brilliant. If it doesn't make sense, dig deeper and ask the Holy Spirit, why did He just change? Why did He go from this to this? Here's the reason. Jesus is doing a word play here. Just as your eye directs your body and focuses on where you should go, it's hard to go somewhere you're not looking at, right? Your eyes lead your body just like your treasure leads your heart. Show me what you're looking at, I'll show you where you're going. Jesus says, show me what you treasure, I'll show you where your heart's going to go. Jesus says, look, your treasure is not just an indicator where your heart is, it can be an indicator where your heart's eventually going to be. Jesus says, look, if your eye is good, and Luke uses a word here that's used nowhere else in the New Testament, a Greek word. It means good, but it also often means generous. And Jesus is saying, look, if your eyes are generous, your whole body will be full of light. And then he goes, but if your eyes are bad, and the Greek word that he uses here can be translated often as envious. Jesus says, look, if your eyes are generous, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are envious, hoarding stuff for yourself, your whole body is going to be full of darkness. Your giving eye, generous or envious, impacts your whole body, not just your giving, not just your heart, your entire existence. Generosity has the potential not to just impact you financially, but it has the potential to impact your whole life. Every facet of your life is going to be impacted by what you decide to do with your possessions. Let me ask you this. Have you ever met an extraordinarily generous person that wasn't happy? Think about the most generous people you know. I promise you, your first thought probably brings a smile because they're happy people. And notice they're not happy because they have money to give away. They're happy because they actually do give it away. Jesus says, look, because they have generous eyes, their whole life is full of light. Have you ever met an envious, greedy, rich person? They have a lot of money to give away, but they don't. They're not happy. The paradox here, Jesus teaches, is that having money does not bring happiness. Having money and giving it away brings happiness. Having money and giving it to God's purposes brings supernatural joy, true peace, true contentment, and true satisfaction. It lights up your entire life. So you see, this isn't a financial issue. This isn't a give to the church so we can accomplish the work God has given us sermon. It's about the condition of our heart. And I believe the reason God allows us to steward his resources is that he allows us to see where our hearts really are. God already knows the true condition of our heart, but he uses our management of his money to reveal that condition to us. He allows us to manage his treasure so we can discover where our hearts really are, not as we see them, but as he sees them. Jesus says, look, you got to make the tough decision to begin sending your stuff and your money in a new direction, not because God needs to move your money somewhere else, but because he needs to move your heart somewhere else. And where your money goes, your heart will go. Generosity breaks the power of greed in the human heart. And then Jesus continues. No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And you may be thinking, okay, all right, I'm convicted, good. I feel guilty. I learned that last week. What am I supposed to do? Does this mean I should never upgrade my stuff? Should I be listening to 8-tracks, eating TV dinners on folding trays, and making Jiffy Pop? How long does my 1972 green Ford Pinto have to last? Does this mean I can never sell my house or my boat? I can never get a new car? I never upgrade my clothes? I want to be obedient. How does this actually work? I know I have greed in my heart. I know I spend my money on me. How do I implement generosity in my life and find the right balance? How do I love Jesus with my money instead of loving my money? Well, generosity towards God starts in his own home. He calls it first fruits. He expects believers to fund the church with our first fruits and to fund other ministries on top of that. I tell people, when you begin to think about giving, I want you to think of 4 P's. We have to learn prayerful, percentage, prioritized, and progressive. That's how we kill greed in our heart. We have to prayerfully engage God. God, you gave us this money. What is it that you want us to do with it? We're stewards of it, not owners of it. You've let us have it. How do you want us to use it? What do you want? How much do you want to give to your kingdom? How many ministries do you want me to invest in? What church do you want me to contribute to? God, what do you want me to do with your money? And how much of it do you want me to use for my needs and my resources? Now, let me tell you, before you ask the question, the answer is yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Get used to that. God directed those in the Old Testament to give a tenth, the first tenth, their first fruit, to the mission of the temple. That may be new information for some of you. If so, it's great. You're learning about God. He expected us to take the very best of what we have and use it for his purposes. So the question we need to ask God as we begin to think about how do I get this greed out of my heart is, God, what percentage am I to allocate to your kingdom? Now remember, the answer is yes, Lord, no matter what the request is. You decide before you ever hear from God that, yes, you're going to do that. And let me give you a hint, it'll probably be more than 10%. The next second thing we do is we think about prioritized. Before I spend a penny on my wants, my upgrades, I'm going to take that percentage and make sure it gets to God so he can do around the world what he's using me to do. I'm going to prioritize the spending, my first spending, on the things of God and not the things of me. Not based on need, not based on gut reaction, not based on my heart going out in a moment of manipulation, not based on whether I like the sermon, whether I like the worship music, whether I like the pastor, whether I even like the church. I'm going to depend on God to handle those kind of things. I am upfront choosing a percentage that God leads me to do, and the first check I write every month is going to go to His kingdom to fund what He wants to do. And it'll have absolutely nothing to do with me. If you give something away with strings attached, you've never given it away. My first check, my tithe, is going to the church, the place God calls His local storehouse. Did you notice in the verse that Malachi distinguishes between tithes and contributions? But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and contributions. The tithe goes to the storehouse. The contributions go to other ministries and other things that God desires for you to invest in. It may be a person. It may be a neighbor. It may be a ministry. It may be something in the mission field. He says, look, I want you to take care of the mission that you're part of. I want your heart to be with the local group of congregants. But that's not where it stops. After that, you have contributions. He wants His church to fund the ministries that move the gospel message forward. He dares you to test Him on it. He dares you to identify where your priorities are. The fourth principle is progressive, which means that time goes by as your income rises, as you begin to grow in your faith, the percentage of giving should go up, not down, and should not stay stable. Some have been faithfully tithing at 10% their whole life, and it's never stretched them because they've never missed it. They never had to depend on God to meet the resources. They never had to depend on God to show up financially because they've been comfortable with 10%. They're self-righteous. They're sitting around going, well, I tithe, but they've never felt stretched. The purpose of tithing is not that God needs money. It's that we need to move our hearts. The lesson doesn't stop at 10%. I know mature believers who are giving over 50% of what they earn to the mission of God. And every year they increase by 1 to 2%. It keeps them stretched. It keeps them dependent on God. It moves their heart even more to the things of God and more away from themselves. But truthfully, most of us aren't even given 10%. It's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. Every once in a while I hear somebody say that people come to church with a tip rather than a tithe. I wish. Every pastor in America wishes that we would tip. You rarely go to a restaurant or a valet and tip 1%. It'd be insulting. If churches in America were filled with true tippers, 10 or 15%, everything God wants to do, every missionary, every fund, every mission, every ministry in town would be so well funded, they wouldn't know what to do. Instead, studies show that most evangelical Christians in the U.S. today give 1.5% of their gross income to the church and to the mission of God. 1.5%. I haven't ever backed off of a topic, so I'm not going to do this one either. Most Jewish people in the first century ended up giving about 40% of what they gave, what they brought in to the mission of God. I want you to think about how much you gave to Remnant and to other missions, other churches, other ministries last year. Put that amount in your head. What if life worked the other way around? What if you were paid based on your tithe? What if your income was 10 times whatever you gave to the church last year? Or to missions, or to ministries? If you had to live on 10 times your last year's annual tithe, what would your life look like? Let me put it another way. Suppose God has $10,000 that He wants to get through you to His missions and ministries. $10,000. How much would He have to give you to get His $10,000 back? He says, look, I see Frank over there. He's got a good heart. I need him to send $10,000 to this missionary over in Africa. How much money do I have to give Frank to get that $10,000 where it needs to go? Well, if I was a 10% giver, I'd need $100,000, God. That sounds pretty bad, right? God, I need $90,000 so I can give $10,000 away. Okay. Do you know what that number is if I'm a 1.5% giver, like the average evangelical Christian? God, I want to give away $10,000, and I'll do it, but you're going to have to give me $666,666. You see, God, if you want $10,000 to go to missions and funds, I need $655,000 for myself first before I can do that. That's 1.5%. And if you realize you would need that much money to give away that much, you may have just realized you're a very greedy person. You've heard us talk about our church for quite a while. We are struggling, trying to meet payroll. We have no debt, no overhead hardly. And we have a hard time meeting just basic needs. It's interesting. It's the only thing that keeps me up at night. How come our hearts aren't invested in the mission that God has at Remnant? I don't understand. Every month we trust God to meet our needs, and the greatest stressor I have is making sure our doors stay open. We have no debt. All of our pastors are bivocational. We don't spend a lot of money. This cafe is self-funded. And what keeps me up at night is not that we don't have money. It's what's wrong with our heart. Really, God, what's wrong with our heart? It hinders what God can do for us. And thankfully, many of you give to us every month. You obey God with your treasure. Your heart's invested here. We operate this church on the basis of a limited number of very faithful givers. But once you start giving to God, He calls you to keep stretching. I always say, if God can get it through you, He'll get it to you. And I'm not suggesting that God limits your giving to the church. He's going to call you to give to all sorts of things. If you have greed in your heart, He's going to rid it by showing you what you need to give to. Let me share part of my recovery from the ugliness of my greed. I've told you that I'm a recovering materialist. I'm a greedy person. My whole life, I've had to learn how to shift where my money goes so that my heart will go there too. For years, I refused to give money to the church. Didn't trust them. I somehow thought others should fund it. Sure, I'll eat your food, drink your coffee, sit in your air conditioning, listen to the pastor, praise team. I might go to a class. I might even go to small group. But these people are so nice, they'll keep paying for it. Oh, I may throw $20 in when I feel guilty. God calls that a guilt offering. I've been there and I've done that. I had to allow Jesus to begin to clear the ugliness out of my heart. Let me share with you how generosity has changed my life. And please understand, I'm going to share with you what Jesus has done in me. I'm not praising myself. Much of what has happened in this area has been in spite of me, not because of me. It's taken me years to learn what God could have taught me in months if I wasn't so stubborn, selfish, and greedy. In many ways, I fought every step. But I want to share with you just a few examples of how God has destroyed greed in my heart and what He's done in my life to help me not worship me. Years ago, I was challenged to look at where I was spending money, to see if I was chasing God or myself. I was a biblical tither. I was giving more than 10%. I was investing in other ministries. I thought, I got this, I'm good. And I looked at my checkbook and I realized that I was spending an enormous amount of money, 3 times what I gave to God, in the pursuit of playing golf. I had a dream I was going to be on the senior tour. 3 times. God led me, or actually dragged me, to stop playing golf for a while. I went in and told Tammy, I'm not going to play golf anymore. She started laughing. And then He told me, I want you to take the money you're spending on golf and I want you to invest it in what I'm going to call you to do. Okay, God, tell me what it is. Well, He said, I'm going to have you start a new ministry. We're going to call it Saline Solution. You and Tammy are going to take the money you've been spending on golf and you're going to start taking care of homeless people with medicines. You're going to share the gospel. You're going to tell them about Jesus. We bought an RV. We converted it into a medical unit. We bought medicines, bandages, medical equipment, EKG machines, lab machines. We cared for over 1,500 people a year for over 10 years. Free medicine, free everything. We never seemed to be able to raise money for this ministry in 10 years. Tammy and I funded it, never told anybody, but we funded about 90% of everything that we did. While many of my colleagues were investing in stocks and retirement plans and other things, we were putting all of our money into the ministry. Looking back, I can see why God never funded our ministry. The lesson was mine to learn, not everybody else's. If others had done it, I probably never would have learned about the blessings that come from reallocating your possessions to the purpose of God. Little did I know that those steps of obedience would today lead to the Remnant Cafe. Looking back now, I can see that we really gave up nothing to gain everything. People ask me, why are you and Tammy so invested in caring for the homeless? Why are you unwavering in this? Well, it's easy. Years ago, we shifted our treasure, and that's where our hearts went. The more we invested, the more our hearts moved. How do you develop a deep love for the people and things of Jesus? Move your money out of your storehouse to His. Stop worshiping you and start worshiping Him. Generosity is the antidote to greed. Many years ago on my birthday, I was always in the habit of going out and spending money I didn't have on things I didn't need, but I thought I deserved. It's my birthday. I've worked hard. I'll go buy me a big present. Can I afford it? Nope. Doesn't matter. I'm important. It's my birthday, and I'm worshiping me. It was just a warm-up for the worst event that happens at Christmas. One year I was praying, and I was planning to go shopping, and I felt God tell me, why don't you just take some of the good stuff you have and give it to somebody who needs it or would appreciate it? Take something that has great value to you and bless somebody else with it. Empty part of your storehouse as a birthday present to me. The only reason you have a birthday is because I gave you one. So every year on or around my birthday, I bless somebody with something that's very valuable to me. Always something I cherish. Over the years, it's been computers, watches, cars, even a really rare fountain pen that I really loved. God tells me what to give, who to give it to, and I already know the answer. Yes, Lord. People are very nice to me in October. I just tell them, hey, talk to God about it. I don't know what's coming up. I can't tell you the joy I receive in seeing somebody else not only blessed by it, but all year long blessed by it. I experienced it last night. It's easy and feels good to give away what you don't need. It's easy to give away what you have more of than you need. But please hear me, giving leftovers never removes greed out of your heart. If you want to get greed out of your heart, give away things that your heart's attached to. Generosity is the antidote to greed. One more, and I want to just share with you how God's honored my life. I've been a pastor for over 15 years. Tammy and I have been in full-time ministry, either in our ministry, the children's clubhouse director, or in the cafe for over 20 years. During those years, we've, for the most part, never been funded by the church. I received a salary at one point for about 2 years, but when it came time to lay off a pastor because our church was unfunded, I gave it up so they could keep their job. Tammy and I are volunteers. I can speak today tithing completely guilt-free because I don't receive a salary. I have nothing against pastors who are funded by the church. I have nothing against pastors who are in ministry being funded. The Word says they should be, particularly those who teach the Word. We are to take care of our pastors. We are to take care of those who are devoted to the ministry. But for me, a man who struggles with greed, just for me and for nobody else, God has instructed me not to receive pay for what I do for Him. Not because it's wrong, but because He called me to give generously to the church in order to get rid of the ugly greed that's still in my heart. Tammy's never received a penny from the church to serve, and she's always worked far more hours than I have. I tell her all the time, when we get to heaven, your storehouse is going to be great. Can I come visit? We've learned that generosity is the antidote to greed. If you want to allow Jesus to clean out your hearts, offer everything you have in your earthly storehouse and let Him tell you how to redirect it for His worship. If you have a home, He may lead you to share it with someone in need for a while. He may lead you to sell it, downsize, free up money for his kingdom. If you have closets full of clothes, he may tell you to give them away, not sell them, give them away to somebody that needs them. He may ask you to skip a vacation one year and invest that time and money in something he's doing. Look at your garage and attic. What are you keeping there and who's it helping? Do you have lawn equipment you don't need? Do you have tools you don't use? Sleeping bags and tents you don't plan to use again? Bicycles that could really help someone? Umbrellas, tarps, strollers, kids' toys, sporting equipment? Generosity is the antidote to greed. God has showed me that my storehouse is not just about my stuff. It's also about my time, my energies, my focus. God keeps showing me new ways to devote everything to him. It's incredible once you move your heart towards giving and generosity instead of spending and greed. God will begin to show you hundreds of ways to help other people. But that really shouldn't surprise us. Jesus, our cardiologist, is searching our heart and testing our minds. He wants our hearts to be truly his. He doesn't need your money. The only reason you have any money is because he's allowed it. But he gave you and I money to show us where it would take our heart. He searches the heart and he tests your mind. What do you think about the money I've given to you? Whose is it? Where are you investing it? Greed is subtle. Greed is an ugliness in our heart that we don't even think we have. That's how effective Satan has been. Greed moves our hearts away from God. Generosity brings us back to him. You can't serve God and money. You have to choose this day who you will serve. Make sure your wealth is invested in God's work and stored safely in heaven. For where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to go. And God wants hearts that are truly his. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for your truth. I thank you that you invest us in your mission. If we as believers don't fund the things of God, nobody's going to. We live in a world that desperately needs vibrant, active churches, ministries that are functioning, ministries that are teaching people about you. God, you never intended that the government or anybody else would be funding your work. You called those of us who are believers to take what you've given us and to reallocate it to your purposes. So God, forgive us when we hold on. Forgive us when we hoard. Forgive us when we fail to give to you what's yours. Help us, God, to have hearts that are percentage givers and prioritized. And help us, God, to begin to think about reallocating what we've done and what we're doing, to think in a new way. Because if we want our hearts to go towards you, we've got to move our resources that way first. So we love you. We thank you for all that you're doing at this church. We thank you for the truth, even though sometimes it's hard to hear. God, make in each of us generous people. I pray, God, that when people look at our church, they see generosity. They see us serving those in need. They see us finding clothes, finding food, finding resources, counseling people. They see us welcoming people who are hurting. They see us doing, Jesus, what you would do. Because we have your heart. Because we're now invested in your things and not ours. We love you. We thank you for all that you're doing. Help us, God, to be not only hearers of the word, but doers. Break our hearts where there's greed. Give us the courage and the opportunity to be generous. We love you. We thank you, and we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.